Mavuika's the best DPS in the game, but is that still gonna stand going into Nod Krai? Let's talk about it. My name is Juice, and let's get into it. So here's the thing. As it currently stands, Mavuika is the best DPS in Genshin Impact. We've got a whole cast of really strong DPSs, but even up until this point, Mavuika still remains as being the absolute cream of the crop. She's still very strong, and basically all endgame is able to be wiped out by her and her best premium team. And considering that she's available right now before we head into the brand new region, do I think that this is going to last? Do I expect that going into Nod Krai, Mavuika is still going to remain as this big powerhouse? Well, to be honest, yes. I actually do still think that Mavuika is going to be really strong whenever we go into Nod Krai, and my reason for this is pretty simple. Let's just take a look at Hoiverse's favorite child, Novelette. This guy came out in Fontaine, and he still remains as being a top 5 DPS to this day. He has indeed been power crept in terms of DPS. We do have characters like Skirk in the game now, and of course Mavuika, who do more damage than him, but even with that being said, he still remains as being a very consistently strong damage dealer, and he's also constantly getting new teammates. He's a character that came all the way from 4.1, so he's been around for quite a while now. He's over a year old, and soon he's going to be 2 years old. And yet he still remains as being a very strong option. And that's taking a look at the absolute cream of the crop of Fontaine. If we take a look at other Fontainian options, they're also pretty good. Chloriander is still a strong unit, even if we have Veressa now, who is a better Electro DPS. And even though Mavuika is indeed the premier Pyro DPS unit, characters like Arlecchino and Linny still remain as very strong Pyro DPSing options. So ultimately, I don't really expect Mavuika to fall off anytime soon. Her damage numbers are just absurdly high. And here's the thing. I don't necessarily think that she's just going to not fall off, because that's a given. She's an excellent off-field power applicator for some absolutely excellent units, such as Kinich for example. But in terms of Mavuika being a top 5 DPS in specific, I think she's gonna last there for quite some time. She's the DPSing Archon. She embodies the spirit of her element, that being damage dealing, and I just can't really see them making a main power DPS that's gonna be better than her anytime soon. Now I can see them making a better DPS in general, one that's going to be stronger of another element, but for Pyro, I think they're gonna leave the crown on Mavuika's head for quite a while. Now granted, Hoiverse is quite unpredictable. They could just show up and give us a better Pyro DPS out of literally nowhere, and I would find that a little bit weird to be honest, because goodness me do we have far too many Pyro DPSs at this point. And now that we have Mavuika, and we have had her for quite a while now, I still don't think we need any more. We don't particularly know what Nod Krai is going to bring to the table, and I will say, I do think that endgame is not going to be shilling Mavuika as much once we do get more of a Nod Krai roster in, because they're obviously going to be the main focus from that point onwards. But I do still think that she's going to be one of the absolute strongest DPSs. One concern I had originally with Mavuika was that making a DPS Archon in of itself is a bit of a flawed concept, because we saw how it played out with Raiden Shogun. That character just feels really weak damage-wise at C0 now. Chevreuse did help out with that quite a bit, but even now, she just doesn't feel that strong, and even if you get C2, that same amount of investment into literally any modern DPS would just be far better. Granted, Raiden does also feature utility, but her off-field playstyle is only really used for Hyperbloom situations, and her on-field energy gen, well, there you go. She needs to be on-field for that. However, I do think that they managed to work around this with Mavuika, because I feel like her off-field capabilities are better than Raiden's off-field capabilities, because here's the thing, the only other off-field power applicator we currently have in the game that's consistent at her job is Xiangling, and anyone who's played Genshin for quite a while, even just a couple of months, knows how much of a chokehold the Liyue Chef has had over the meta for quite a long time now. So simply being another option within that niche already makes her more decent in the long run. But I'd say that if going into Nod Krai the DPS ceiling doesn't suddenly shoot up out of nowhere, I think Mavuika should remain as being pretty solid for quite some time now. So at least in her back pocket, she's always going to have that use case of being a good pyro applicator from off-field. But with that being said, as a DPS, I do still think that she's going to last for a decently long time. Now granted, there isn't really much of a way for her to escape the same fate as Raiden, because here's the thing. Ultimately, the DPS ceiling is going to go up and up over time, and eventually, there will come a day where Mavuika won't feel that impressive anymore, but I just don't think that's going to be anytime soon. Like, genuinely, it's going to take a couple of years to get to that point. It will happen at some stage, but I really don't see it happening for at least another 2 years or so. Maybe a year, worst case scenario, if Nod Krai really bumps things up that much. But then the Fontaine units would also fall off at the same time, and I just don't think they would do that. Genshin's always been pretty gradual, in my opinion, when it comes to how they shift their meta. I don't really ever think there's been a case of Genshin making one new character and then all of a sudden, yeah, now half the roster is totally useless. That just doesn't really happen. It's usually a very gradual shift, at least in my opinion. And we are going to be getting a whole bunch of cool, lore-important characters in Nod Krai, seeing as that's kind of the main point of this upcoming region. But I would like to point out, Skirk, I think, is probably the strongest character that we have playable now in terms of lore. I believe that her being from, like, another world and stuff, that has prescience over basically every other character. I mean, I'm not sure if she's stronger than Novelette, but I'm pretty sure she's above a Dragon Sovereign. I don't know, I have no basis on that, but I am pretty sure that she's stronger than an Archon, or at least stronger than Mavuika at the very least. But in terms of meta, she's still weaker than Mavuika, so if even she isn't stronger than her, then I don't think that the first couple of Nod Krai units are going to completely wash her. Honestly, I can just see her being useful for a decently long amount of time. I mean, it's hard to say, only time will be able to tell, and it is true that most of her value is tied to Notline units, but at least for Notline units, she's always going to be useful. Think about it like this. If you want to main a Sumeru main DPS, barring Scaramouche, 9 times out of 10, you're gonna want Nahida. Even if the plant kit isn't really all that crazy nowadays, she's still good for those specific characters, and I believe it's gonna be the same case with Notlan. For example, if you want to main Kaniche going into the future, then Mavuika's always going to be a good pull for you, because she's always going to be the best off-field power applicator for that unit. I think the real question as to whether Mavuika is bait before Nod Krai or not has actually little to do with her own kit value, because personally, I just can't see her falling off anytime soon, at least not drastically. She's just in a really good position right now if you have her premium team, and even if it is true that over time, her value might start to depreciate in terms of her DPS playstyle, she's always going to have that off-field playstyle to rely on. And besides, like I said, I just don't think she's falling out of top 5 for at least another year unless Nod Krai is absolutely crazy with the power scaling in terms of DPS. The question rather lies in should you be saving for whoever's going to come out in 5.8, and are they going to benefit the 6.x characters? Because it's quite common practice for Hoyoverse to release a really good unit before a new region comes out that ends up being the best in-slot support, or a really good support for multiple characters of that next upcoming region. The most infamous example is Kazuha, that's the one that basically everybody points to. However, I would also like to point out that this happened with Emily for Kaniche mains. She ended up being the absolute de facto best in slot for that guy and makes him far more comfortable to play, and helps him shoot out more cannon shots very consistently. She's easily the best for that guy. And she also ended up being solid for Mualani teams. She wasn't really crazy with any other Notlon character outside of those two, but she did still end up being quite good for the early Notlon units. Yelan was also the last limited 5-star release that we got before we went into Sumeru, and goodness me did she end up being very, very strong. I personally knew at the time that this was going to become quite the meta staple of a character, so I picked her up on our release, and boy am I glad that I did, because has she provided a lot of value to my account over the years. I would say the one time this didn't apply was the tail end of Sumeru. If you take a look at the character archive, there's not really any noteworthy release that ended up being super significant throughout all of Fontaine. I mean, don't get me wrong, Baiju's a good unit, and he did end up being very good for Novelette teams. I should also mention that he was just a great healer in general, and this is whenever the HP drain meta started to become a thing. But I don't really see him as being as significant as the other pre-region releases were, and besides, I believe he came out in 3.6, not 0.7 or 0.8, so I don't even think he really qualifies, to be honest. But as for every other 0.7 or 0.8 character that has come out before a new region, they've generally ended up being quite important for the next region afterwards. So like I said, the question is less, is Mavuika gonna stay good? For what she does and for who she supports, yeah, she's gonna stay good. And I do think that in terms of quote-unquote bait, Hoyoverse is somewhat trying to bait us in a sense. They put this crazy Archon who's really good and is probably going to stay good for quite some time at the tail end of Notlon, knowing that people are going to want to pick her up because hey, she's been really good for all this time and she will continue to be good. And then they're going to throw a new unit at us in 5.8 who's likely going to be quite good for Nod Krai. So I'd say my advice in this situation, we're pretty close to the Genshin livestream. Now, if you remember whenever Notlon was coming out, I believe it was the 4.7 livestream, they did tease some of the Notlon characters, or that might have been the 4.8 one, I'm not particularly sure, but they did do some teasers. So we're probably going to see what some of the Nod Krai characters look like soon. So in that case, I would say that you should probably just wait until then, see what they look like, see if you're personally interested. I don't think we're gonna get much, probably just like a short teaser the same way as last time, if anything. And if none of those characters interest you, then I guess you're basically fine. Since it's likely that whoever they tease, if they do decide to tease anyone, they're likely going to be coming up with some of the first banners within Nod Krai, and whoever comes out in 5.8 is likely to be good for them. That's just my personal guess though. And as for Mavuika, like I said, I just can't really see her falling off anytime soon, so I would say that you could even wait for her next rerun to see if she's still a formidable DPS, and if you still want her by then, or if you're still maining Not-On units by then. I really don't think that there's a bad choice that you can make at the minute. I'd say that you can still safely pull her. It's more so 5.8 that you want to look out for. But either way, I do think that Mavuika's gonna stay good. She's carved out her own niche in Outland, and I just don't think she's gonna fall out of top 5 all of a sudden, because that just doesn't really happen, and really good Fontaine DPSs that were good during that time are still really good now. So I all around think you should be alright. But what are your thoughts on the matter? Do you think that Mavuika's gonna fall off pretty quickly, or do you feel like she's gonna stay pretty stable? Let me know down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. I have a second channel if you're interested in checking that out. Hopefully this video was able to tell you whether Mavuika is bait before Nod Krai or not. This has been Juice, signing out, and perhaps she's bait in the sense that she'll take all of your Primo gems before you see all of those cool and awesome designs that they've got cooking.